Hi, everyone. Welcome to the 50 States High Pointing podcast. I'm your host, Lauren, and today we have a returning guest from episode 7, Mike. And for those of you who don't remember Mike, he and his son summited all 50 state high points. His son is Daniel, and Daniel was on episode 12 talking about his experience. So, Mike, it's good to have you back, and I understand you just got back from another trip to Nepal. And we'd love to hear what you did there, where you went, the people you visited, and can you just talk about your trip?
Yeah, we just actually just returned just a few days ago, actually, and we were over there for about, I don't know, what was it, a month, I suppose, and we actually got back out to the village area that we used to live in when we lived there 35 years ago, which was kind of neat because I hadn't been back. Well, I've been back, but not like that to where I could actually spend some time in the villages. And so we got back into this area up there in western Nepal, And at that time when we lived there, it was a 2-3 day walk out to the village, or sometimes 4-day walk out. And now you can basically drive all the way. So they've gotten cars. And back then, 35 years ago, they didn't have matches or mirrors out in this village, and now they've got cell phones. Can you believe that? They sit there and talk on these stupid cell phones. So guess what you see the Nepali girls doing?
Yeah, they don't need mirrors. They're taking selfies with their phones.
You get these cell phones. Now it works out good for us because you got instant communication, so I can talk to Nepali people I want to call. But back in the old days, 35 years ago, it would take us 4 weeks to get a letter home and back to the States. 2 weeks to get out and back, and then 2 weeks to come back. And now you can call. It's just unreal how technology has changed things. But on the other hand, we got out to the village, the house we used to live in, actually, and I think I sent you a picture of that. There's a guy dressed up. So I went to the house we used to live in. The guy remembered us, remembered our kids, 2 boys, and the monkey we used to have because I'd gotten the Jacob monkey one time, and that was about the stupidest mistake. You'd never get a monkey, man. They're a pain. But they remembered all that
to the list. Thanks.
They're nothing but a pain. But anyway, it was interesting because this guy's older now, older than me, I suppose. And it was fun because he said, I'm glad I didn't die yet because I was able to meet you again, And it was kind of a neat thing. And so we went in the house and had water buffalo milk and did all that kind of stuff. So it was neat getting out there and seeing all that stuff and seeing the changes and seeing people that remember us and all that. And then I had a team of 4 other people, 2 girls and 2 guys. 2 guys are from Alaska, and then a girl's from here, Talkeetna, actually, where I live. And then we had a girl from your neck of the woods, someplace down here in Maryland, actually. And her brother was with me on a trip. Well, it's the trip I talked about in that thing about the earthquake. The next day after the earthquake in Nepal, the next day we're going to go back in. The parents were so mad at me and stuff. Well, her brother was on that trip, and her parents allowed her to come, and so she was on the trip. And so it was a good group, small, easy group. Could fit into one Jeep and and do the stuff we need to do. Didn't do a lot of trekking this time, but that's all right. It's you just do what you do. But it was a fun trip. And I think one of the girls is still a little sick. I think she picked up something. So I tell people, I said, you're never in the clear until you've been home 10 days. So I said, after we've been home 10 days, you can consider yourself clear because a lot of those amoebas or giardia, you get them because of the cysts, the eggs, and the eggs go through a cycle, and it's usually about a 8-10 day incubation period for that stuff. So when you're home 10 days, you're pretty clear. But I think she's been having problems, so I don't know what that means.
So what did you guys do with your team in the village?
You know what? Mainly we visited a bunch of little churches and that are out there now. And, small little village house churches that have sprung up, and we just kind of drove to them and visit them and got to know people and stuff like that. And then, of course, I've got a lot of connections in Kathmandu and Pokhara that we were able to connect with. I always do, and renew stuff there, relationships there, and stuff like that. And then when we get to Pokhara, it was kind of neat because Pokhara is a neat little tourist town compared to Kathmandu. It's not so dirty and big and all that. It's on a lake, and when we get there, I know several leaders there, church leaders, and we were there over Easter, and the Easter kind of thing is interesting in Nepal because that's the one time they allow the church to actually do a parade through the streets, and all the churches get together and do that. And we just kind of were there. We tagged along on that deal, which is kind of neat to see because it's just part of the deal there. But it was just kind of a good trip. And then on the way back, we stopped in Thailand, and Thailand I wanted to specifically try to find this place it's called the Juniper Tree, and it was in a place called Hua Hin, which is 2 hours south of Bangkok, and it was a rest house for missionaries to come to that need a break, and so they would come and sit on the beach for a month. We used to go there every year. We'd have 11 months in the village, and then we'd spend 1 month at the Juniper Tree on the beach with the kids, and you could eat all the food you wanted and all that stuff because there's not a lot of food there in Nepal. But so it was a really neat spot. It was really a neat thing for us as a family to be able to do. Well, make a long story short, that was 1988, 1989, and I had one of those big VHS camcorders, I lugged around everywhere, and I interviewed the lady that started that, which at that time she was old. And so I interviewed her and her testimony and how she started it and all this kind of stuff. And I had that recording, and so I put it on a disc and then actually put it on a jump drive. And I wanted to get that to those guys. They've since moved a little further south, but I said, I got this recording of Ruth, original kind of recording. And, well, they jumped at the chance because nobody's got anything, over like that. So I took that down there, and we sat for 5 days down in South Thailand and kind of sweated because it's so hot down there. So that was kind of the thing, and then we came home. So then we've been home for, a few days, so kind of a little trip around.
So it's trekking season in Nepal, I understand, and it's almost approaching Everest climbing season. Did you see a lot of those tourists around?
Well, where I go, you don't see a lot of trekkers, They don't go where I go.
Okay.
More of the rural back Nepali village stuff, they're trekking there is going to be the Annapurna Circuit or Everest Base Camp or those kind of things, the high Himalayas, because I told you I did that. I just finished right before COVID hit the Great Himalayan Trail, right? It goes from east to west. Yeah. And there's 2 Great Himalayan Trails. There's one high one, which cuts through the Annapurna Circuits and up in the high Himalayas, And then there's the lower mid-range trails, what I did, and that cuts through the middle ranges where most of your Nepali people live, because it's not a place you can live up in the high Himalayas, And so most of your Nepali people live in the middle ranges of the Himalayas. Now those middle ranges are 4, 6, 8,000 feet. So it's not like the desert in Palm Springs or something. So you still got the mountains. But when you trek in that area, it's a little different than if you're up in the high Himalayas where the tourists go. That's what they want to see is the Everest Base Camp or the Annapurna Circuit stuff. And I've done some of that, like in Larky Pass and all that. But when I did the Himalaya Trail, I wanted to go through as many villages as I could. And that trail isn't necessarily a trail like you think of a trail. It's more inter-village connection trails. And so it's you're pretty much off the beaten path of tourists. You'll never hardly ever meet anybody out there. Let's put it that way. If you do that 1,000-mile trail, you probably count on one hand the times you meet a Western tourist, and that's just in a certain area it might be in, And the only reason I could do that is because I knew the language, or I know the language, and I can get by out there and live that way. And because there's no restaurants, there's no whatever. And it took me 6 years to do that. Because you have to do it in sections. Because monsoons are starting now, In fact, I just talked to my Nepali friend. It's been raining for 3 days in Kathmandu. Monsoons start in June and go June, July, August, and into September. You can't trek then. And so right now is when you want to be trekking, or you have to wait until October, November, or September. But that's the best trekking time over there. And but it's been rainy, I guess, right now. So whatever that means. But
so when you do the Himalayan Trail, do you need yaks and other kinds of support like that, or is it just you and your team?
You know what? You just take a day pack and a few things, you know, and day pack. I mean, a small carry pack. You know, I don't pack a lot of stuff because you don't really need tents and sleep bags. Although I have taken them. What we always do is you stay in a house, you know, a Nepali house. You just kind of show up and they'll cook rice. That's the way Nepalis live, you know. They travel that way, and so they can stop at a house, they cook rice, and they can sleep on the floor in the house or whatever, you know.
So what does that mean? Do you knock on a door and explain that you're doing this trail and you need a place to stay, or how exactly does that work?
Yeah, you know what? Often that there was one trip when I had, when we had 13 young people. My wife was on that one, but we came over a pass. And it started thundering and lightning, and it was nasty weather. I mean, really nasty. And we're coming down. I stopped at a house, and I asked them if we could stay, and they say, yeah, of course, no problem. So he just didn't expect 12 or 13 young people to pile in. So we had to stay in their goat or their cow shed, basically. And so, yeah, that's how the country moves. It's really pretty hospitable that way. And then some places you'll have tea houses that set up to cook rice and stuff, and then you can buy your rice there and then sleep there. And so they usually have some upstairs place above the shed, barn or whatever, that you can just throw your bags in, you know, or whatever you're going to sleep in there. So it's a pretty easy way to do that. And I mean, I had people, you know, when we lived in the village, we'd have about 90 miles of dirt road we had to go down to get to the trailhead, and then it was a 3-day walk or 4-day walk out to our village. So at that trailhead, you're always trying to get to it, but 90 miles, and it never failed. You'd meet a truck or a vehicle broke down in the middle of the road. It's like a logging road. It's not wide, it's rough, and it'd be somebody broke down, and I just want to get home. And they'd break down and stop, or you'd have to stop because somebody in the middle of the road broke down. They're off to India to get an axle or brakes or whatever they need, you know, so it's going to be a while.
Wow.
And people just got off the bus, and they just go filter into the houses around and stay and talk for 2 days, you know. And I said, forget this. So I just start walking, go around it and keep walking until I got some kind of ride and got to the trailhead. You know what I mean? But that's how they are. It's just their way, you know.
Wow. So how do you get to the trailhead, and where is that trailhead?
Well, nowadays, you know, that trailhead now has kind of been moved up because of the road. So you have to go to Pokhara, and from Pokhara you drive to Baglung, and then Baglung you drive 8 hours to where we used to live, actually. And then now, so it's different. But in the old days, you would have to go to Pokhara, and then you'd have to take a day bus to Tansen. And then from Tansen, you'd have to take a jeep 90 miles on that dirt road, which would come to a trailhead, which is a town, basically. But that's where you start walking. It's all changed a lot now. But, yeah, it just depends what trail you're doing now. I mean, on my Himalaya Trail thing, I would do it in sections. So when I started, I drove all the way to the east of the country, a town called Tapaljung, actually, next to India, Sikkim, Darjeeling area. So 28-hour Jeep ride, 28 hours to get to that trailhead in the east. And then we got off and started walking west, and then came, you know, after about 7 days, whatever it was, or 10 days, I forget. Then we came out. And
these are when you say a 28-hour drive, we're not talking on a smooth developed road, are we?
No, not really. And there is a pretty nice road on the Terai, which is the flatlands. But after that, it's just pretty rough roads, and you got landslides, monsoons, you got all kinds of problems, mud holes, and it's just one thing after another. Nothing's easy and smooth, I'll guarantee it. But you get there, and then you start walking, and that's what I tell people. I don't know if I told you this before, but I had on that first trip with 28 hours over that east trailhead, and I told people, listen, I'm not doing all this, and then you get a little tummy ache and have to quit. It ain't going to work. You're on your own. I guarantee it. If I do all this planning for 8 months and then do a 28-hour Jeep ride, and you get a little upset tummy because the water's different, you're going to have to live with the upset tummy or whatever, but I'm not leaving. I'm going to continue, or you can go back on your own, whatever, because you just can't do that. And then, because you meet all kinds of people and their tolerances all differ, and one person, it's like a lot of people, they get what I call the poodle syndrome, poodle, where if you move the dish over 2 inches, it gets nervous and gets diarrhea because it doesn't know where the dish is, and it shakes, I said, well, okay, this, so you're getting the poodle syndrome because you're not in control, you don't know what's going on, you don't like the food. It doesn't matter. You can get the shakes and diarrhea all you want, but we ain't leaving. We're going to finish this thing, or you're going to go back on your own, and you just have to learn to live with it, because I've had so many different groups, so many different guys. One guy, when we did that, we got to 28 miles. We started on the trail. It was steep downhill, and got to the bottom of the hill. A couple had to turn around because his back went bad, and this guy was only about 35 years old, and so his back went bad. They walked back up the hill, And I said, well, that's, the way. And then the next day, a guy older guy, he was about 50, and his hip went bad. And all these guys tell me they hike and they're tough and blah, blah, blah. It's like filling out your paperwork for the Army, man. You are the best of every, whatever, It's like, well, okay, it is what it is. I got to take your word for it. But his hips went bad. I had to hire 5 Nepalis to carry him out.
Oh, you're kidding.
Back up the hill. He couldn't walk.
Oh, man.
So you're on your own. I'm not quitting. So, you get up there and get a bus or whatever it was. That's the way it is. And
so can you describe the majority of the terrain throughout that trail? I understand it's over 1,000 miles, but what do you see?
Oh, geez. Just up and down all the time. You spend all day. You spend 6 hours going down and then 6 hours going back up. It's just rugged stuff. And when we went through the Everest section, it's got the deepest valley around, and that took us all day to go down and then all day to go up. It's just deep valley. It wasn't necessarily high, like a high Himal thing, but it was just deep ravines and stuff. And nothing's ever flat. I mean, people look at you and say, well, I didn't know it was going to be so mountainous. You don't go to the Himalayas and think it's like going to the Phoenix Zion National Park or something, man. It's the Himalayas, it's like, but it's like anything, you kind of have these things in your mind, but no matter what you say, by the time you get there, it's like a lot of hard up and down, and then it's like, how are you going to get out of this deal? You can't.
So how did you guys train for that in the States?
I never trained for that stuff. I just.
How did the team train?
Well, I don't know how they train. Some of them not very well, apparently. I don't know if they. Well, I don't know. Individually, maybe a few did running programs. I never checked. I never asked. I just figured, if you're old enough to come, you're old enough to, like I told you, I think in the last video I told you I give people 4 options if something happens, right? Remember that? 4 options?
Yeah.
You get hurt?
Yeah, well, it's like any other guided trip. When you fill out the paperwork, they're not going to check your references exactly, unless you have some crazy medical condition. They might call your doctor, but they do have to take your word for it. And then they find out when you start hiking what your capabilities really are.
Well, and that's the thing. And everybody thinks because I guide at bush cabin stuff in Alaska, and everybody always tells me they're in really good shape and they hike and all that. But what their idea of a trail is different in Missouri. It's a trail. And yeah, I hike trails all the time, but it's not the same as the Himalayas or whatever. So it's always a shock, it's because it's hard, and it's usually hot, so it's a lot of hot weather and things like that. So it's not easy, but I think people always overestimate their ability and underestimate the area they're going to go to, and then
Sure.
it comes into play, and then they kind of. But afterwards, everybody's glad they do it and all that. I've only had a couple, maybe 2 or 3 that couldn't do it. The biggest problem I get is, even this last time a little bit, is usually girls. No, not 100% of the time it's been girls. For some reason, your species is prone to eating problems, like I'm gluten free, or I'm a vegan, or I'm this and that.
Oh God, yeah. There's a whole list.
That's not a good place to come to Nepal and be picky about eating, because I ask them, "Are you a picky eater?" "Oh no, I can eat anything, but I can't have this, so you're a picky eater." And so I had one girl on a trip. Actually, this was in Bhutan, and she was, come to find out, vegan, and wouldn't eat eggs, wouldn't eat milk, wouldn't eat this, wouldn't eat that, didn't eat a lot of stuff. And no, actually, it was in Nepal. It was going over Larky Pass, which is the highest pass you can walk over. And she, I don't know, I was up there, I was waiting for hours at the pass, and ice and snow. It's really cold, and just wasn't showing up. And all of a sudden, some Tibetans were coming up with a mule train, horse train, trading thing, and they had an empty mule, so they put her on the thing, and they got her up over the pass, And, well, I asked her husband, I said, "What's the deal?" He says, "Well, she's vegan now, and she doesn't eat eggs." I said, "Well, you can't turn that stuff down if you get eggs up here, rice and all that. That's all you get." And she didn't have the energy to make it, bottom line.
Yeah.
And so she had to get on a horse, and then when we got back to Kathmandu, finally, she was passing out. She'd stand up and pass out, stand up and pass out. So they had oxygen in her nose and in a wheelchair. And the reason was this is when I looked into this, actually. She had a lack of B12, which is a chronic problem with vegans, and they got to supplement that B12 somehow. Well, she wasn't. So she didn't have the red blood cells to carry the oxygen, whatever. She'd pass out. And I looked at her husband. She was younger than me. I said, "Lonnie, what is the deal?" I think she went to Europe, and she got on the Save the Chicken kick, and then that she wasn't going to eat any animal stuff, and she feels healthier. And I said, "Lonnie, look, I'm not the smartest guy in the world, but here she is, 30 years old with a tube out her nose and sitting in a wheelchair. How does that make her feel healthy?"
Yeah, jeez.
But
and you also have the people in that region. I understand that Hindus don't eat meat either.
No, they eat meat. They'll eat chicken, they'll eat goats, they'll eat water buffalo, they'll eat all kinds of meat. They just won't eat cows.
Oh, okay.
And then you might find some of your Hindus down in India or cities that are vegetarians.
That's right.
But in the villages,
but not in the highlands.
No, I've never met any of them that wouldn't eat chicken or goats or water buffalo.
Okay.
And yeah, so because Hinduism came up from India, so it didn't necessarily take in the village sections. It might have in the lower sections of Nepal and where the Indians live. So down there, you might find your purist that's just a vegetarian, but up in the villages, man, they don't have that luxury to do that.
No, and that's exactly what it is. It is a luxury to call yourself a pescatarian, a vegetarian, a vegan, a gluten-free. And, you only find, I can't say that, that's a very absolute statement, but you mostly find people in first world that can choose those diets and make those claims.
Sure.
Where resources are more limited, you eat whatever is provided by.
Yeah. I mean, you got to grow what you eat, and you're not going to you'll just be able to raise and grow what you eat. So that's going to be cattle.
Yeah.
And most of those animals that they grow have cows or water buffaloes, they're work animals. They plow the fields, but they also daily produce something. So they produce milk every day, or they produce eggs every day. You know what I mean? They don't just get them to kill to eat. They're production animals. They produce the milk every day, eggs every day, and then they'll use them for meat every once in a while. And
So, how do you prepare your stomach for the first time you drink water buffalo milk or anything from a village that you're trekking through? Because there's no way to prepare for that in
no,
Alaska.
you know what? I never do. I never prepared. I just lived out there. I was sick all the time. I usually had giardia all the time. Beaver fever, whatever you want to call it. And that's pretty common. And then, of course, our kids, they'd get amoebas every once in a while, giardia. You kind of live with that stuff. There's no way around it. And you got medicine you can take, but you got to be careful of that. So I don't know if you can ever prepare. I mean, the common thing is people will tell me that come on the trips. They say, well, these people are used to it. No, they're not used to it. 40% of the kids died before the age of 4 in the village we lived in. They're never used to amoebas or bacterial infections. Now you do learn to fight certain things off, and you develop a resilience to more things, but you're never going to be able to fight off amoebic dysentery or amoebas that attach in your stomachs or giardia. You kind of learn to live with it. But I've got a lot of Nepali friends that are sick a lot, and they live there. And so I think you can. I guess what you can develop a resilience for is able to kind of eat the foods, which is basically rice and lentils, and it's nothing fancy, and it's nothing wrong with that stuff, and most people can eat that, unless you're vegan, because they'll cook the lentils in animal oils, fats or whatever. But I never had people really react to the food so much. The thing you got to be careful of in Nepal, and I always tell them, don't waver off the main menu, which there's no menu, but at least in the villages, it's always rice and lentils twice a day. That's what the Nepalis eat. We call it dal bhat. And it's twice a day, rice and lentils twice a day. I said, now if you veer off that, if you get on a tourist area and you veer off that into the French fries and hamburgers, I said, you might as well put a gun to your head. I said, the rice and lentils are the best. It's boiled, rice is boiled, lentils are boiled. Just stay with that. Don't veer off into because you miss mom's cooking or something, a hamburger, because you're going to get lettuce, whatever you're going to get. It's not safe. I don't even care if you're in Kathmandu. Okay. I'm real careful about what I eat in Kathmandu, because you don't know how they wash the lettuce or the tomatoes,
Yes. Yeah. I've been in places where I would only eat something that had a peel on it.
Peel.
That I could peel off.
And when we lived there, we would have to soak those things in iodine water. We'd soak lettuce, tomatoes in iodine water. But you just don't eat that stuff anywhere. I don't even care if it's a tourist place. Just stay to the rice and lentils. I said, that's your safest bet. And then, of course, your the tea, you never really know if it's boiled all the way or whatnot. So ultimately, you can't really control all of it. You can kind of minimize your dangers, but you're just always vulnerable there.
I've heard reports in the Everest region, some pollution in the water because there's a lot of human waste that's carried off of the mountain, and it has to be, or it's, I guess, dumped somewhere. And there's been reports of that contaminating village water. Have you ever run into any instances of contaminated water?
Always. All of Nepal is contaminated.
Yeah. Even though it's like water that...
Let me break the news to you right now. All of Nepal rivers are contaminated unless you go up really high. Villages use the rivers for the bathroom and throw in the dead bodies in it, half-burned bodies in those rivers, And then when the monsoons come, it kind of rises and flushes off all the stuff off the side of the river. That's where the people go. And so part of our project when I lived there was to bring clean water into the villages. And we would only be able to, we would have to go up high and find a clean source. And then we would pipe it down to the village. And so that's what you'd have to do to get clean water. And then you got the cows in the rivers, all of the rivers are polluted, basically, unless you get up really high, because those rivers go through all villages and through they're diverting the river through the fields and the cow manure, and then they go back into the river. It's all polluted. It's just not Everest tourist stuff. Tourists are the minimal amount of pollution. I lived there 35 years ago, and you couldn't drink any water unless you could filter it, or it was really a high source in the high mountains where the snow line is, basically. And
Wow.
and the Nepalese never had, where we live, they never had outhouses. That was part of our project, was to bring in outhouse stuff. So they always just went to the river and went to the bathroom on the river, and then
Wow.
that's where they did it. And so it was always kind of an iffy deal. But yeah, there's all that pollution, but it's nothing to do with, it's nothing unusual. It's not new because of tourists on Everest, believe me. There's nowhere in Nepal I would drink out of a river. Anywhere, unless saw it come out of the snowfields. Because they do the wash in the river, they do all their wash in the river, the cows, it just goes on and on.
Wow. So what are the conditions like this most recent trip? Did you see improvements in the way that they, recycle or get rid of waste?
Well, there's a lot of improvements in the area we were in, because now everybody's got it. Pretty much everybody has an outhouse, so that saves people having to go to the river in the early morning hours, and all that. And the outhouse, of course, cleans up a lot of problems.
Mm-hmm.
And the water projects, they really all understand the value of clean water now more than anything. Back in the old days, they didn't see any difference. They didn't understand why you had to have clean water, basically. But once like I said, in the village we lived in, 40% of the kids died before the age of 4.
Wow.
And that was hygiene. That was water problems. That was bacterial infections from water. And once you brought clean water into the village, that kind of just disappeared. That rate went way down. And they could see that, and everybody knew it. And so it was a big improvement, that everybody could visibly live with, in a good way. So once you brought clean water, and I think that's true anywhere in the world, if you bring clean water and you improve people's lives a lot, because you need water for everything, and so.
So how would they drink before? Would they just boil it from the river?
Never boil it. No, too much firewood to use boiling it.
Oh, okay. Okay.
You just drink it. They'd have a spring. I'll give you an example. In that one village where he lived in, there was a source of good water, actually. A spring came out. And the problem was, when the cows got loose, they'd go sit in the thing, and so we tried to tell the villagers, hey, if we fence that off, that'll keep that clean, and they would never do it. It's too much work, so the cows would get in there and pollute the thing, and it's just what they lived with, Of course, we wouldn't. We'd have to filter our stuff, but that was kind of tough. I mean, when you got that kind of mortality rate, it's a problem, and people are always sick, and the average age for a woman back then was probably 48 years old. I mean, the health thing is, people say, "Oh, what an idyllic life." It was not, and is not. It's a rough life to live day by day. What you can do, and it's changed a lot that way with the clean water that's come in and all that. And then the access to medicines and things like that's helped out a lot too.
So along the trail, is there any access to a doctor?
No, you'd have to go to the nearest town for a doctor. We would see, it's really sad actually, but where we lived, there would be a 4-day walk to the nearest hospital, right? Tansen. And we would see women that have been in labor for 4 days. And then finally the husband decides to get them to the hospital and pay somebody to carry them.
Wow.
We'd meet them on the trail day by day, because you pretty much stop at the same places, And every day she's getting weaker and weaker, being carried, just groaning all day to get to the hospital. And a lot of people died in childbirth like that, giving birth, and babies, and it's not easy. I mean, those people really suffered, There's just no medical. Yeah. And what they had in our village too was witch doctors or shamans, and So that was a big thing. I try to help them get well, paying these shamans to do stuff all night, chants all night, which didn't help. But I mean, the only recourse they had was to go carry somebody to a hospital. And it's not unusual to see somebody being carried to a hospital. Now, of course, you got vehicles which help out a little bit, but back then you had to carry.
I reached out to this woman called Lakla Sherpa, and she holds the record for most successful Everest summits for a Nepali woman. And she lives in the States now. She lives in Connecticut. And she's going to be on the podcast when she gets back from Pakistan. She's trying to do K2.
Oh, yeah.
But she is so thankful to live in the States and to raise her kids here because she just remembers there not being a lot of opportunities for women. There were opportunities for men, she said, to work in Nepal, but not really for her. And she always wanted to be a high altitude worker.
Yeah.
And, she did get the chance eventually, but then she actually had more opportunities when she came here. So she's an interesting woman. I hope she's successful on K2, and I'll be able to talk to her when she gets back.
Well, for women over there is no opportunity. I mean, girls, they didn't even let go to school because somebody has to watch the cattle all day and the sheep. Because you don't have farmland there. Well, let's put it this way. You got the terraced hillsides that they grow their crops on to live, right? You just don't have a field you can turn your cattle out to. Because every available, flat section is going to be taken up with crops. That's what you live with.
Yeah.
Or live on. And so somebody has to take the cows out every day to a certain area and watch them so they don't get in the neighbors' terraces. So kids have to do that. So they take the sheep out on the hillsides where there's no terraces, and they'll watch the sheep and the cows all day and then bring them back. Or they have to climb the trees and cut the leaves out of the trees and take them to their animals at the barn. And so girls often will have to do that instead of go to school. And so the schooling is a tough thing for young girls. And then plus, other factors of religious worldview of women. Let's put it that way. It puts a thing against them pretty quickly. And so the only opportunity a woman, now they can live in Kathmandu in the big cities and probably have opportunities, but in the village there is none. There really isn't. And that was part of what we do too, is non-formal education, try to teach girls, ladies how to read Nepali, and stuff like that.
Wow.
So, but yeah, Kathmandu, they could work in offices or this and that, but it's not going to be the same as like the States, the kind of opportunities you get here.
Sure.
But in the villages, there's nothing. You're pretty destined just to, live day by day, cooking and eating, and it's a tough life. It really is. And when men, they don't, they're just going to work the fields. They're not big jobs out there. It's just a farming kind of agrarian kind of thing, Not that you're going to go to Walmart and work. I mean,
right.
It's just the way it is. But you come into it kind of bugs me because I see people always complain about when they see a picture of a Sherpa, which is a tribe, by the way. It's a tribal group in that area, Everest region. They see them carrying heavy loads for foreigners, and their big thing is the exploitation of them, blah, blah, blah. I say, well, you don't know what you're talking about because that's a big job for them. They can make more. They can make more in a trip than most Nepalis would in a whole year. And that's a good job. That's how they make jobs. And where we lived in the village, the only job guys had besides farming was they could carry loads for a shop owner or something. And so they'd go out to the nearest town, pick up all these orders of food and carry it in and get paid so many rupees a kg. And they'd carry it for 4 days, get in, and they make money. Now, if they couldn't do that, the only recourse for most of them was to go to India for a job. And so many of them would have to go down to India to work for so many months because the farmland they had would only supply 10 months of food a year. So somehow they had to make up for 2 months. And so if they could carry goods back and forth and make money, great. If not, then they go to India and try to make up those 2 months of wages, to buy enough food. And
Yeah.
so the fact that a Sherpa can come in and make good money, good wages, carrying loads in his home country, home area, that's a pretty good thing for him because, like I said,
Yeah, and it's only a couple months, right? Everest
no,
season is
2 months, but they
May,
make good
June.
money doing
Yeah.
it, and it's a good industry for them, and that's what they would do. If they didn't have that, those Sherpas would go to India or something for jobs. I mean, the tourist stuff, like anywhere, tourism brings a lot of jobs that allow you to stay in your home. And so it's not a bad thing. I mean, people think, well, if they can't make a union wage at Walmart, they're being exploited. No, there's pretty good for them to have that kind of. Now I understand it's hard work, but they'd be doing that anyway. I mean, it's
Yeah.
just and
It's the way of
but
life. Yeah.
they jump at that. Most of them to make the kind of money they make carrying. Even a guide, a guide can make. It used to be what 25 a day or. I can't remember a while ago. It's like $25 a day or something like that. I have to check that. But anyway, that was a day. For most Nepalis, they don't make 100 a month, and so it's good money doing that for them.
Sure. And, it also is dangerous work when you look at what they
Oh
do,
yeah, sure.
From fixing ladders over the ice fall, fixing ropes all the way up to the summit and down. And there's always, when an incident happens on Everest, a Sherpa involved. Of course,
Yeah,
there was a massive loss during that earthquake and then an avalanche that ensued.
sure.
And I think that there was a death this season of Sherpa on the ice
Sure.
fall. It's just the work that they do is just so
Well,
dangerous
let
so
me say,
that we can have a
yeah, and
safe.
that's right. It's a risk. The job is a risky job, climbing. Period. So
Yeah.
let me say this. I was a logger for 12 years in Northwest Washington, north of Mount Rainier. I worked in the woods. 80 people a year died logging. Now, did
Really?
anybody tell me that was too dangerous? Blah, blah, blah. It's just part of the risk of the job.
Oh, yeah.
So, whatever occupation you're in, if it's like these kind of jobs, there's a risk, and you just accept it and do it. The climbing Sherpa risk is there, and they accept it because it's a prestigious kind of thing too. If you can make that, you got prestige, and versus just selling tea at a tea shop, and whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And so there's that risk of climbing, but there's jobs in America that have risks, and so you
Mm-hmm.
just have to. Is that the job you want to do, and are you able to accept the risk? And nobody likes to see people die on Everest, but nobody likes to see people die anywhere, on any job,
Mm-hmm.
And look at the construction workers that sit on the side of your road down there. I mean, those guys are wiped out every year by some callous or careless driver, There's a risk.
Or you look at wildfire firefighters.
Oh, fires, yeah. Firefighting, yeah. Exactly. And so
Yeah.
just to set off there's a risk climbing Everest, so they should never do it or whatever. It's just the risk of the job that they have, like an occupation would have firefighting here or whatever, My wife just reminded me of something I wanted to throw in there before I forget.
Yeah.
Part of the thing what I do too is every time I go over, we always gather about 100 coats, nice little coats from Walmart. We always take it over to orphanages.
Oh, good.
And so I'm going to send you a picture of that. There was one place in November next to Tibet, we took about 80 coats up to this orphanage up there because they could never afford coats, I just sent you, texted you pictures, okay?
Okay. Yeah, I'll put those on the episode at the end of the video.
And so we always do those kind of things, and a little side note, she just reminded me, I forgot to say that. So we always take jackets over and, people
Oh, that's
don't
good.
haul them over and give them to these kids because they can't afford coats, and so it's always neat for them.
Before we wrap up the podcast, I want you to tell listeners and viewers a little bit about the guiding that you do in Alaska and your next adventure that starts tomorrow.
Oh, well, yeah. I take a lot of people out to the bush cabin, which is out in the wilderness, and all that. You've seen that clip of that guy that came out, that YouTuber.
Yeah.
And,
Yeah, that was cool.
Funny guy. But so anyway, this with the season of snow, like I said, we still have 2 feet of snow here in Talkeetna, and at the cabin probably 4 feet. So we're going to go out. We'll go out tomorrow and snowshoe out. Hopefully the crust will freeze at night, and the crust is hard in the morning, so you can walk out. Because once it kind of break up out there, means that the snow kind of turns to, I don't know what you call it, mashed potato kind of stuff, where even snowshoes you'll sink in up to your knees, and you can't really walk that far doing that. But we'll try to get out in the morning, and you come back early next morning kind of thing. And bears are coming out up there now, the grizzlies, so it's always a good time to go out and spot them and stuff like that. So, coming out.
So Denali season is upon us. Do you see a lot of climbers coming in now?
Not yet. Well, May 1st, middle of May they will.
Okay.
I suppose, but right now it's not yet. So, it's starting, man. The summer's coming, and it hits here, and then that's it. June hits, and boy, you better be enjoying summer, because it's July. End of July on, it starts getting fall up here. It's done. So
really,
basically, May and June are your summer months up here.
Okay.
I was going to tell you too. I wrote a Nepali book.
Oh, you did?
Yeah. Can you see that?
Yeah. What's that about?
It's kind of like, it's the same kind of format as the book Bear Attack Dog Team Sinking Boat that you read of mine. Yeah. Same kind of thing, using stories to illustrate spiritual truth. But this one is using village illustrations from the villages. So I wrote it just for villagers who don't have a real high education, and they can understand the stories. And so it's the same format thing. But that right there, the top.
Do you guys hand that book out when you visit the villages?
Yeah, I usually give it out to the leaders and stuff. I've printed over 7,500 of these books out now, and leaders just love it. Leaders love it in Nepal, the church leaders, because it's a real simple devotional kind of thing that the villagers can really like and get a hand on. It's not high up kind of theology book, basically. But that title right there says Jesus in the Himalayas.
Okay.
That's what the title is. So, and that's just stories that they're just different things, I mean, like the book you read of mine.
Yeah.
But using village stories. So, yeah.
Thanks for agreeing to be on the show again. It's really cool to have you return as a guest and then come back and talk about your experience in Nepal. It's super
it's a little different from your high pointing things. But
it is, and it's fun to hear about a trail that no one really does, the Great Himalayan Trail. You often hear about the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail, the Appalachian Trail.
Yeah.
But I don't know anyone who's hiked the Great Himalayan Trail, and I have never heard of that until you mentioned it. So thanks for having those stories for us and for sharing your experiences.
Yeah, it was fun.